This week could go down as one of the most important weeks of the century. Historians will likely look back on this week as a pivotal moment. And this is not hyperbole, guys. The global world order is about to be upended this week in South Africa as the BRICS nations come together for their first global summit since the pandemic. Get ready for everything to change. It won't happen overnight, of course. The sun will still rise on Wednesday morning, but the underlying structure is now shifting beneath our feet. This is a tectonic movement. And if you're an investor, you need to pay attention to what's about to happen to the US dollar. So Goldman Sachs, you know Goldman Sachs, they believe that by the year 2050, the BRICS nations will dominate the global economy. And the G7 nations will be a relic of the past, something left over from the 1900s after World War II. On Tuesday, the BRICS summit officially kicks off in South Africa this week. This is the first face-to-face BRICS summit since the start of COVID. And we're about to witness a rebalancing of the world order. The agenda items at this summit are massive. Currency, trade, military cooperation, AI, microchips, oil. The list is endless. And the US, by the way, I guess their invitation got lost in the mail. And the British, they didn't get an invitation either. Germany, they're not welcome. Is this game over for Western hegemony? Now, for those of you that don't know, BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Now, it started out as a small collective over a decade ago, and it's become the greatest threat to Western power that we've ever seen. And I'm not talking about military power, which we'll get to in a second. I'm actually talking about economic power, oil power, computing power, trade power, the greatest weapons of all, economic warfare. Top of the agenda is the US dollar, squarely in the crosshairs of these tanks ready to fire. Here's how Foreign Policy magazine headlines the moment. A BRICS currency could shake the dollar's dominance. The de-dollarization moment might finally be here. Really? Is it true? After all, talk of getting rid of the US dollar as a reserve currency goes back to the 1960s. Here's the New York Times in 1968 talking about France trying to separate itself from the US dollar. French President Charles de Gaulle versus Lyndon Johnson back then. This isn't new at all. But now we are at a tipping point. Brazil's president, Lula da Silva, says that every night he asks himself why all of these countries have to base their trade on the US dollar. Well, now they don't have to. They don't have to ask themselves that question anymore because a gold-backed currency that stands as the backbone of the new BRICS currency is being rolled out in earnest. Brazil, Russia, China, India, South Africa, trading oil, computer chips, minerals, and then settling those transactions in a reserve currency that has nothing to do with the US dollar. All of the previous meetings of BRICS have been leading up to this moment in South Africa.
BRICS countries are home to more than 3.2 billion people, around 40% of the global population. None of the bloc's members is in the G7, the group of 7 advanced economies. To increase its influence, BRICS is considering bringing new members into the fold.
Just look at trade between BRICS nations. There's a massive financial surplus. The BRICS nations have a trade surplus. Brazil just hit a trade surplus record, if you can imagine that. Why would they want to settle transactions with US dollars? Meanwhile, Europe's trade deficit has hit a new record, nearly $500 billion deficit. So which side would you rather be on? Of course, this isn't happening overnight. There are big impediments, of course, to a BRICS currency. The biggest issue right now is that if Russia wants to import things from other countries that are not named China, they'll likely have to do it in US dollars. But what if more countries join BRICS and ditch the dollar? Then that dollar is not underlying these transactions, and there's safety in numbers. In fact, other countries are noticing and begging to join. At this summit, Russia and China are expected to approve the application of a bunch of new countries into BRICS. Algeria, Bahrain, Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, just to name a few. They've all submitted requests for membership to the body. And the Turkish government has also expressed an interest in joining this group. But wrap your heads around this, guys, because those first ones I just mentioned, that's small potatoes. Because more than 40 countries are now vying to join BRICS. 40.
Samita, what are you hearing about just how much bigger BRICS could get?
Well, we've heard from leadership here at the BRICS, this Foreign Ministers BRICS Summit, that at least 19 countries have expressed either formally or informally interest in either joining the BRICS grouping or even having involvement with the BRICS Development Bank, which really is aimed at investing in the global south, in developing nations to boost their economies. And this is one of the reasons that BRICS is becoming increasingly attractive to developing nations.
BRICS now accounts for 31% of global GDP. And just a few months ago, they overtook the United States and the G7 nations for GDP dominance. Goldman Sachs won't have to wait until 2050. It's already happening. And beyond a gold-backed currency and moving away from the US dollar, one of the biggest stories of this summit is AI, artificial intelligence. One of their top agenda items this week in South Africa is holding meetings on AI. BRICS wants to dominate AI. And who will be the leader of this? None other than China. No one will be close. China announced that it wants to become the global leader of AI by the year 2030. And I don't know if you know this at all, but China is a communist country. And when a communist country makes a pledge like this, it's all about the prestige, right? They have to put their best foot forward. So they must make it happen to save face. Surprisingly, this was already well known in Washington. At the Pentagon, a major threat to America, China becoming the dominant player in AI. In fact, an Air Force cybersecurity whistleblower warned the Pentagon 2 years ago, said we must make AI a priority or China will crush us. He wasn't really a whistleblower. He was just telling his bosses, hey, here's what's happening. Here's what we are not doing. Here he is. His name is Nicholas Chalin. He warned everyone, and no one listened to him. He saw what was happening, and because no one paid attention, he quit in protest. He quit because he said, what are they doing? It was impossible for the United States to compete with China on AI. And in this article, it quotes him as saying, we have no competing fighting chance against China in 15 to 20 years. Right now, it's already a done deal. It's already over, in my opinion, he said. Chalin went on to say that AI capabilities and cyber defenses of some government departments were at kindergarten level, he said. Kindergarten, which I guess is better than preschool. He recently said China has kids as young as 7 years old starting on learning AI and machine learning. And the United States doesn't stand a chance. That means it's kids in like kindergarten, first grade, basically, learning AI.
Interesting to see that China is not wasting that kind of time and they're not waiting for us to figure it out. And they're taking this very seriously, including having their kids starting at 7 years old be trained on AI and machine learning. So when you start thinking that kind of investment and really the understanding that whichever country is going to be leading AI and ML will be controlling the planet.
Let me repeat what he just said. Whoever leads in AI will rule the planet. The BRICS nations, getting rid of the US dollar as a reserve currency, build a new trade and military security infrastructure, and dominating AI. Europe and the United States are shaking in their boots right now, and they should be. This week in South Africa is going to be a game changer, and we'll be watching it very, very closely here on this show. So that's the news update part of today's video. Now I want to tell you about today's